This video will discuss some issues with the principle of fairness and the principle of charity that are discussed in your reading for this module. So we'll start with the principle of fairness. The principle of fairness says, we should always interpret the argument in a way that is consistent with the author's intentions. For example, we should always use language that is as close as possible to the language the author uses. We should not put words in the author's mouth or take words out of the author's mouth. So in other words, it is important to preserve the meaning of an author's statements in an argument when we're interpreting it. Okay. And then we have the principle of charity, which says, if there is some uncertainty, we should always put the argument in the best possible light. If there is ambiguity, always choose the interpretation that makes the argument stronger rather than weaker. So in other words, if there are two possible interpretations of an author's argument, we should pick whichever one makes the argument stronger. Both of these seem like really good principles that we want to have if we're going to be interpreting an author's argument correctly and fairly, which is a thing that we want to do. However, there's a problem because sometimes these two principles conflict. So this is an exercise in the text in the module. So it says, consider the following argument. All CMU sophomores are students, but aren't all Pitt sophomores too? So no Pitt sophomore is a CMU sophomore. The exercise asks how we would rewrite this argument according to the principle of fairness. And so the way we would do that is we would write, well, the first premise is all CMU sophomores are students. That's straightforward. And then we take the rhetorical question, but aren't all Pitt sophomores too? We turn that into the premise, all Pitt sophomores are students, because that's what the rhetorical question is really saying. And then the conclusion is no Pitt sophomore is a CMU sophomore. Okay, then next we're asked to take that same argument and rewrite it according to the principle of charity. And so the answer, according to the text, is that we should, according to the principle of charity, we should rewrite it as all CMU sophomores are students. No Pitt sophomores are students. Therefore, no Pitt sophomore is a CMU sophomore. So, and we would rewrite it this way according to the principle of charity, according to the text, because this makes the argument stronger. Because rewriting it the second way makes the argument valid, whereas it's invalid when it's written the other way. So, what should we do when they conflict? So here we have two possible interpretations of the same argument. We can't do both. So what should we do when they conflict? Which principle should we choose? In other words, is it better to be fair or to be charitable? So the answer, according to the text, seems to be, they say, the convention in logic is to represent the argument in such a way that the premises directly support the conclusion and leave the question of whether the premises are true to the evaluation stage. So this seems to imply that the principle of charity trumps or outweighs the principle of fairness. I think this is the wrong answer. If this is the way you choose to go, then any argument can be made valid or strong. For example, the argument that we were looking at, sorry, went back too far. This argument here, by reinterpreting it according to the principle of charity, you've made the argument valid, but it's a big change from the original argument. It's to say that all Pitt sophomores are students is a very different statement than saying no Pitt sophomores are students. And in fact, saying no Pitt sophomores are students is not at all what the argument was claiming. So you've changed it very dramatically. So personally, I think that this is the wrong way to use the principle of charity. I don't think that this argument is ambiguous in any way, and there is no reason to change it. So I would disagree with their assessment of how we should rewrite this argument according to the principle of charity. So that's one way that, maybe this problem doesn't even come up. But let's suppose this is a real problem, because I think there are cases where this could be a real problem, a real question. So let's suppose this just really is a real issue in this particular argument. Well, I don't think that the principle of charity necessarily trumps. Okay, so what they did in that argument, and what could happen if we think that the principle of charity always trumps the principle of fairness, is that we would basically rewrite any argument so that it was valid, and that's not what we want to do, because then we're not really assessing the argument correctly. So this is carrying the principle of charity too far. So this is my executive decision. So you should definitely employ both the principle of charity and the principle of fairness when interpreting an author's argument. However, when they conflict, if they really do, and we'll get back to that in a minute, then I'm declaring that the principle of fairness wins. So in particular, you should never violate the principle of fairness in order to satisfy the principle of charity, which is what I think they did in that argument that we had, that example in the text. So luckily, in this case, we don't really have to choose. So our premises were all CMU sophomores are students. All Pitt sophomores are students. That was our original premises. However, if we add an additional, very plausible premise, then the argument is valid. If we add the premise, no Pitt student is a CMU student. And that makes sense, at least if we mean by a Pitt student and a CMU student, one who's matriculated in that college. You can't be matriculated. Well, actually, I suppose maybe you could be matriculated in two colleges. I actually don't know if there's a rule against that, but it's unlikely to happen. People don't usually do that. Pitt students do take classes at CMU and vice versa. So we want to make sure if we were assessing the truth of these premises, we would want to make sure that we weren't interpreting it that way. Or if we did, things would change. But if you add this very plausible premise, then the argument is valid. So, here's one possible moral. If you come up against a case where it feels like the argument should be valid, but can only be made so by changing the premises completely, instead look for an implicit premise that can fix things. This is actually the solution that the text ends up with, but I just wanted to make all of this clearer and more explicit than I think the text does, because I think it was kind of muddy in the text, what it is that you were supposed to do if these things conflicted. It certainly wasn't clear that this is like what you're always supposed to do, so I just wanted to clarify that.